Hey everybody, it's Miss Megan. This is Sunday, May 3rd, and we are going to be continuing our Root of Jesse series today. Today we're going to be talking about Salmon and Rahab and the exciting things that happened during their lifetime and how they became part of the root of Jesse in the lineage of Jesus. So let's get started. So far we've learned about Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, Judah, and remember during the time of Judah, the Israelites had to go to Egypt because there was a famine, and they ended up staying there and growing in lots of numbers, and they ended up being enslaved by the Pharaoh because they were too many people, and he was afraid that they were going to try to overtake him, so he made them his slaves. And during that time, Perez was born, and Hezron, and Ram, and sometime around then is when the Israelites were able to escape Egypt because God helped them leave in the time of the plagues called the Exodus. And then they made some really bad decisions. Even after God had taken them out and had saved them from the Passover and part of the Red Sea, they still made some very poor decisions, and they sinned and they started worshiping idols and just being really ungrateful. So God decided that the people that he had actually brought out of Egypt, the people who were adults then, would not be able to enter the promised land. And so the Israelites were going to have to wander around the desert for 40 years to learn a lesson from God about how they needed to trust in him. They would only be able to get their food from him, and he wanted them to learn that they could depend on him and that he was so faithful. And so at this point, they wandered for 40 years, and so Ram, Aminadab, and Nahshon were alive during that point. And then it came to the point where it had been 40 years, and it was time for them to finally enter the promised land because a lot of the older people had died away. And so the younger people who were children at the time of the Exodus, they were allowed to enter the promised land because they hadn't made those same bad decisions that their families had and their parents had. So that it was time to go into the promised land, but there was one problem. There was a city standing in their way, and the city is called Jericho. And so today we're going to learn a really cool story about Salmon, who was the son of Nahshon. And so Salmon ends up marrying a woman called Rahab. But who is Rahab? Rahab was a woman who lived in the city of Jericho, which was, again, the city that was standing in between the people and the promised land. They had to get through Jericho before they could enter the promised land. So to learn a little bit more about Rahab, we are going to watch a movie.
Rahab. Rahab lives in Jericho. Jericho is a big city with tall, strong walls. God tells the army of Israel to conquer the land where Jericho stands. 2 spies from Israel enter the city. They need a place to hide from Jericho's soldiers. Rahab bravely hides the spies on her roof. Rahab tricks the soldiers by telling them the spies left the city. The spies tell Rahab to hang a scarlet cord from her window and gather all her family into her house. If she does, her family will be safe when Israel's army arrives. Rahab then lowers the spies out the window so they can escape. When the army captures the city, the spies see the scarlet cord and know which house belongs to Rahab. She and her family are safe. Rahab's bravery saves her family. She goes on to become the great-great-great-grandmother of another brave hero, King David.
That was such a cute little movie. We learned a lot about Rahab, the woman, and how she helped save the spies that the Israelites sent into the city of Jericho. So let's talk about what happened in the rest of the story. So we've talked about how the Israelites had to wander for 40 years. So this map that you're seeing here shows exactly where they went, starting in Egypt over here and ending way up here in Jericho. But you can see instead of taking a straight line and taking a lot less time, they had to do all these crazy things. They had to walk down and around, and sometimes they made circles. And this was part of God having them wander for 40 years. Remember, we have to learn to trust God, and they weren't doing that. So they had to learn their lesson before they could enter the beautiful place that he had prepared for them. And so here they end up right here on the other side of the Jordan River, right across from Jericho. And that land, that green land you see there beyond that, that's the fertile soil of the promised land. And that's where they were trying to go. So we end up with this problem though. The city of Jericho was big, it had strong walls around it, and it was not going to be easy for the people to get through. But God had a plan like he always does. And so we end up with the story, and you may have heard this story before, of Joshua and the Battle of Jericho. So Moses at this point has died. He was not able to enter the promised land, but a man named Joshua kind of became the leader of the Israelites. He was someone who loved and trusted God and was very brave. And so he was the one that was said to be having to take them into the promised land. So Joshua received a message from the Lord telling them to march around the city once every day. And then they were going to do this for 6 days. And on the seventh day, God wanted them to march around 7 times. And then he asked them to blow their trumpets as loud as they could and that the walls would come down. Well, this sounds a little bit crazy, doesn't it? And I love this picture. You can see the people in the city looking at these weirdos who are walking around their city. They probably thought, what in the world? But it worked, and the walls did come tumbling down, all except the house of, who do you think? Rahab. That's right. Rahab's house was spared, and God did not destroy it. And that's when they were able to escape by hanging the red cord outside of the window. And she and her family were able to escape because they had helped the Israelites when they sent the spies into the city. And she recognized that there was something very special about these people. And she became a follower of God after this. And she married Salmon and ended up being in the line of Jesus. Even though she was not an Israelite by birth, she became an Israelite because she knew that God had not only saved her, but he had saved the people so many times, and she saw the power of God. So next week, we're going to talk about their son, who I'm sure a lot of you have heard of. There's another great story coming up next week, and it is so exciting as we start to get into these stories of the lines of Jesus, of stories that we're very familiar with. But it's also awesome to remember that a lot of these people were in the line of Jesus itself. Not only do they have cool stories, but they're part of who Jesus was. So I hope you all have a wonderful week, and we will see you back here next week. Bye-bye.